Art restorer Arthur Pendleton receives an unusual invitation to visit a remote and imposing Gothic estate that hides dark mysteries. Summoned by a reclusive master, Arthur soon finds himself entangled in a web of whispers, chains, and a family secret so disturbing it will shatter his deepest convictions. What is truly hidden in the depths of the mansion, and what is the price of truth when it is finally revealed? The chill of late autumn bit at Arthur Pendleton's cheeks as the carriage rattled along the winding, overgrown lane. His breath plumed in the crisp air, mirroring the wisps of fog that clung to the skeletal trees. Arthur, a man of refined tastes and meticulous skill, was a renowned art restorer, his reputation built on a delicate touch and an unwavering commitment to his craft. He had journeyed far from the bustling artistic circles of London, drawn by a most intriguing commission: the restoration of a centuries-old family portrait, one rumored to possess a history as rich and enigmatic as its aged canvas. The isolated estate, known only as Blackwood Manor, loomed before him, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Its Gothic architecture, adorned with crumbling gargoyles and ivy-clad stones, exuded an aura of profound solitude, an almost melancholic grandeur that both fascinated and subtly unsettled him. He was to reside there for a full week, immersed in the delicate process of breathing new life into the fading masterpiece, a task he usually relished. As the carriage wheels ground to a halt on the gravel drive, a hush descended upon the surroundings, broken only by the mournful hoot of a distant owl. The silence was not peaceful, but rather a heavy, expectant quiet, as if the very air held its breath. Arthur gathered his tools, his precious solvents, and his meticulously organized brushes, each instrument a testament to his dedication. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping over the manor's imposing facade, noting the boarded-up windows on the upper floors and the pervasive sense of abandonment that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the old house. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down his spine. He dismissed it as mere fatigue from the long journey, yet an inexplicable premonition, a faint whisper of unease, settled deep within him. The heavy oak door, adorned with intricate tarnished brass, creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. A tall, gaunt man, dressed in somber, impeccably tailored attire, emerged from the shadows. His face was etched with lines of worry, and his eyes, though polite, held a deep-seated sadness that immediately struck Arthur. This was Elias Thorne, the master of Blackwood Manor and the patron of his current endeavor. Elias offered a polite but somewhat distant greeting, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to emanate from a profound weariness. He gestured for Arthur to enter, and the door swung shut behind him with a resonant thud, sealing them within the manor's formidable embrace. The interior of the manor was a labyrinth of dim corridors and grand, albeit dusty chambers. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, damp earth, and something else. Something subtly metallic and faint, like old rust. Tapestries adorned the walls, depicting hunting scenes and ancient family crests, their colors muted by the passage of time. Arthur's footsteps echoed on the polished stone floors, each sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. Elias led him to a spacious chamber on the ground floor, designated as his workspace. It was a large room, sparsely furnished but well lit by a tall window that overlooked a disheveled, overgrown garden. In the center of the room, draped in a protective canvas, stood the imposing portrait, his week-long challenge. As Elias unveiled the painting, Arthur felt a thrill of professional satisfaction. It was a magnificent piece, a portrait of a stern-faced patriarch from centuries past, his eyes seemingly following Arthur's every move. The canvas was indeed in dire need of attention, its colors faded, its surface marred by layers of grime and the ravages of time. This was precisely the kind of challenge he relished, a true test of his skills. He envisioned the vibrant hues he would coax back to life, the intricate details he would painstakingly restore, transforming the aged relic into a breathtaking work of art once more. Elias, however, seemed preoccupied, his gaze often drifting to the ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the room, as if measuring the relentless passage of time. He spoke of the manor's long history, its ancestral lineage, but his words were punctuated by frequent, almost involuntary sighs. There was a nervous energy about him, a subtle tremor in his hands as he gestured, that suggested a mind burdened by more than just the restoration of an old painting. Arthur, a man of keen observation, noted these subtleties, filing them away for later consideration. He understood that true restoration often required understanding not just the art, but the context in which it existed, the very environment that had shaped its existence. As the evening deepened, Elias showed Arthur to his allocated chambers, a comfortable, though somewhat austere room on the second floor. The bed was draped in heavy velvet, and a roaring fire crackled in the hearth, offering a welcome warmth against the encroaching chill. Before leaving, Elias offered a polite but firm instruction. Arthur was to remain within the designated areas of the house. Certain parts of the manor are simply not safe for visitors, he explained, his voice low and devoid of elaboration. A curious flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Arthur, accustomed to the eccentricities of his wealthy clients, merely nodded, attributing the warning to the usual desire for privacy in grand estates. As Elias retreated, his footsteps fading into the pervasive silence of the manor, Arthur found himself standing by the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds. The wind rustled through the ancient trees, their branches casting long, skeletal shadows that danced in the pale light. He considered the week ahead, the delicate work that awaited him, and the intriguing, albeit somber, presence of Elias Thorne. The old manor, he mused, held secrets, and he, Arthur Pendleton, was now a guest within its guarded walls. A subtle apprehension mingled with his professional curiosity. He felt an undeniable pull, a sense that he was about to uncover something far more profound than just a forgotten masterpiece. The following morning, the oppressive stillness of Blackwood Manor continued to weigh on Arthur. The air was thick with unspoken words, a silent tension that hummed beneath Elias Thorne's reserved demeanor. After a frugal breakfast, served by a stoic, elderly housekeeper named Martha, Elias led Arthur back to the designated restoration chamber. As Arthur meticulously prepared his tools, laying out his delicate brushes and small vials of proprietary solutions, Elias sat in a worn armchair by the unlit hearth, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the oriental rug beneath his feet. He seemed to be wrestling with an internal conflict, his brow furrowed in a perpetual state of worry. Finally, with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of countless sorrows, Elias broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared the very walls might possess ears. "Mr. Pendleton," he began, his gaze finally meeting Arthur's, "there is a matter of utmost delicacy I feel compelled to share with you, given your extended stay within my humble abode." Arthur, accustomed to the eccentricities of the wealthy, paused his preparations, offering a polite nod, sensing that this was no ordinary confidence. He anticipated a request for discretion regarding some minor family scandal, perhaps a clandestine affair or a financial indiscretion. He was, however, woefully unprepared for the revelation that followed. "My daughter," Elias continued, his voice tightening with a mixture of pain and shame. "She resides below stairs." He gestured vaguely toward the floor, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Arthur's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. While not entirely uncommon for children to be kept separate in grand houses, the phrasing struck him as odd. He waited patiently for further explanation, his professional composure masking a growing sense of disquiet. The faint metallic scent he had detected earlier seemed to intensify, subtly, unsettlingly. "She is unwell," Elias confessed, his voice barely audible now. "A terrible affliction has befallen her, one that has ravaged her mind and body. It has rendered her violent, unmanageable." His eyes, filled with a deep, consuming sorrow, met Arthur's, pleading for understanding, perhaps even pity. "For her own safety, and for the safety of those around her, I have been forced to confine her." The word confine hung in the air, heavy with implications that sent a subtle shiver down Arthur's spine. The casual, almost matter-of-fact tone with which Elias spoke of such a drastic measure was deeply unsettling. Arthur found himself struggling to process this information. A daughter locked away in the depths of the house, deemed violent and unmanageable? The notion was disturbing, conjuring images of tragic figures from Gothic novels. He thought of the cries he might have heard, or perhaps imagined during the night. He had dismissed them then as the mournful sounds of the old house settling or the rustling of creatures in the surrounding woods. Now a cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. The tranquility of Blackwood Manor, he realized, was a carefully constructed facade, concealing a profound and harrowing secret. "Martha, our loyal housekeeper," Elias explained, his voice regaining a fraction of its former steadiness, "assists me in her care. It is a burden, Mr. Pendleton, a heavy burden that I bear with what little strength I have left." He looked utterly exhausted, as if the weight of his daughter's illness was slowly crushing him. There was a raw, undeniable grief in his eyes, a paternal anguish that, despite the shocking nature of his confession, seemed genuine. Arthur felt a pang of sympathy, a human reaction to a father's suffering, even as his mind raced to comprehend the full scope of this grim reality. The conversation had shifted the entire atmosphere of the manor. What had initially been a professional commission now felt steeped in a chilling, personal drama. Arthur's focus on the portrait wavered, his thoughts consumed by the image of a young woman, confined in the darkness, a prisoner in her own home. He wondered about the nature of her illness, the precise form her violence took, and the extent of her isolation. A sense of unease, far deeper than his initial apprehension, settled over him, a cold blanket that seemed to snuff out the last vestiges of warmth in the grand, silent house. He forced himself to nod, to offer a gesture of understanding, though his mind was reeling. He wanted to ask questions, to delve deeper into the harrowing details of this predicament, but a sense of propriety, and perhaps a burgeoning fear, held his tongue. The silence in the room became even more pronounced, no longer just quiet, but heavy with the weight of Elias Thorne's confession. Arthur resumed his work on the portrait, his hands moving with practiced ease, but his thoughts were far from the delicate hues of the canvas. They were in the dark, unseen depths of Blackwood Manor, where a daughter, afflicted by a mysterious malady, lay imprisoned. The revelation of Elias Thorne's confined daughter hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence that permeated every corner of Blackwood Manor. Arthur, despite his attempts to focus on the delicate work of restoring the aged portrait, found his thoughts constantly drifting to the unseen prisoner below. The image of a young woman, afflicted by a mysterious malady and deemed violent, gnawed at his mind. His professional curiosity, which usually drove him to uncover the secrets of the canvas, now extended to the grim secret of the manor itself. The quiet hum of his work, the gentle scrape of his tools, felt insignificant against the unspoken tragedy unfolding within the house. Unable to suppress his burgeoning concern, Arthur decided to cautiously broach the subject again. He watched Elias as the man paced restlessly in the sitting room, his gaunt figure silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the leaded windows. Elias appeared even more withdrawn than usual, his face etched with a deeper sorrow, his eyes holding a haunted, distant look. Taking a deep breath, Arthur finally broke the uneasy silence. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice soft, almost hesitant, "you spoke of your daughter's illness. Forgive my presumption, but what is its nature? Is it a recognized affliction?" Elias stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point. His shoulders slumped, and a heavy sigh escaped his lips. The question seemed to dislodge a fresh wave of despair within him. He turned to face Arthur, his eyes clouded within profound weariness. "It is a peculiar malady, Mr. Pendleton," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "One that baffles the most esteemed physicians I have consulted. They have offered no diagnosis, no cure, only theories that seem to contradict one another." He shook his head slowly, the gesture conveying a deep-seated frustration and hopelessness. Arthur pressed on, a flicker of professional skepticism mingling with his genuine concern. "But surely," he ventured, "they must have offered some name, some classification for her condition, or at least a set of symptoms that would define its nature?" He recalled his own encounters with peculiar artistic ailments, the subtle decay of pigments, the inexplicable cracking of varnish. But this seemed infinitely more profound and disturbing. He wondered if this was some rare neurological disorder, a form of hysteria, or something far more sinister. The metallic scent in the air, though faint, seemed to sharpen in his perception. Elias's gaze hardened slightly, a subtle shift in his expression that suggested a reluctance to divulge further details. They speak of a wasting, a profound change in temperament, a heightened sensitivity to light and sound, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if reciting a well-rehearsed script. But none of their treatments have offered so much as a glimmer of hope. It is as if she is consumed by something unknown, something that defies their understanding. He averted his gaze, his hand unconsciously clenching into a fist. The evasiveness was unnerving, creating more questions than answers. Arthur observed him carefully. There was an undeniable evasiveness in Elias Thorne's responses, a carefully constructed barrier around the truth. He wondered why a father would be so secretive about his own daughter's illness, especially to someone who was living under his roof for an extended period. Was it shame, or something more sinister? The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken anxieties. The comfortable familiarity of the manor now felt like a fragile illusion, constantly on the verge of shattering. "I have dedicated my life to finding a cure," Elias continued, his voice gaining a flicker of desperate intensity. "I have spent fortunes on rare texts, on obscure remedies, on consultations with those who claim to possess esoteric knowledge. But to no avail. The disease progresses, relentless and unforgiving." He seemed to be speaking more to himself than to Arthur, caught in a personal hell from which there was no apparent escape. The image of a father consumed by the relentless pursuit of a cure for an unknown affliction was both tragic and deeply unsettling. Arthur felt a growing sense of unease. The vagueness of Elias's explanation, combined with the extreme measures taken to confine his daughter, painted a disturbing picture. It was a picture of a man desperate, yes, but also of a man concealing a truth far more profound than a simple illness. The lack of specific medical terminology, the insistence on its unknown nature, all contributed to a growing suspicion that something far more sinister than a conventional disease was at play within Blackwood Manor. He refrained from asking further questions, sensing that pressing the issue would only further entrench Elias in his secrecy. Instead, he returned to the portrait, his hands moving with automatic precision, while his mind grappled with the disturbing implications of Elias Thorne's carefully veiled words. The silence that settled between them was no longer just polite. It was a silence filled with unspoken fears, unacknowledged horrors, and the chilling realization that the truth of Blackwood Manor lay buried deep beneath layers of paternal anguish and enigmatic pronouncements. The mysterious illness of Elias Thorne's daughter continued to cast a long, unsettling shadow over Blackwood Manor. Arthur, diligently at work on the portrait, found his mind constantly returning to the enigma of the confined woman. The elusive nature of her malady, combined with the extreme measures Elias had taken, fueled a burgeoning sense of unease that permeated his every waking hour. The creaks and groans of the old house, once dismissed as mere structural sounds, now seemed imbued with a deeper, more ominous significance, as if the very timbers whispered of secrets and sorrows. He found himself listening more intently, hoping to discern any sound, any faint indication of the woman's presence below. Driven by a persistent, gnawing curiosity, Arthur decided to press Elias for more information, albeit cautiously. He observed the master of the house, who seemed to drift through the days in a perpetual state of quiet anguish. Elias often sat in the library, surrounded by dusty tomes, his gaze unfocused, lost in thought. It was during one such moment, as twilight painted the library in hues of deepening gray, that Arthur approached him. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice measured, "you spoke of your daughter's illness. May I inquire as to how long she has been afflicted? Has this condition been a long-standing one?" Elias stirred, his eyes slowly focusing on Arthur, as if emerging from a deep, melancholic reverie. A flicker of pain crossed his features, followed by a familiar, almost automatic tightening of his jaw. He seemed to weigh his words carefully, choosing them with a deliberateness that suggested a practiced evasion. "It has been 2 years, Mr. Pendleton," he replied, his voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. The brevity of his answer, rather than offering clarity, only served to deepen the mystery. 2 years, a considerable length of time for an illness to remain undiagnosed, for a young woman to remain confined. Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. 2 years. That was a significant period for a person to be isolated, to suffer from an unknown ailment. It also implied that the initial onset must have been sudden, or at least rapidly escalating, to necessitate such drastic confinement. He wondered about the woman's life before this affliction. Was she vibrant? Happy? What kind of transformation could occur in a human being over 2 years that would warrant such an extreme measure? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and unsettling. He tried to gather more details to elicit a more expansive response, but Elias simply offered no more information. He merely looked away, his gaze returning to the worn leather of his armchair, as if the conversation had concluded. The unspoken message was clear. This was a topic he wished to avoid, a painful wound he preferred to keep hidden. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken truths and the chilling implications of Elias's evasiveness. Arthur understood that pushing further would be futile, and perhaps even unwise. The lack of further elaboration from Elias was particularly unsettling. It was not merely a reluctance to discuss a painful subject, it was an almost impenetrable wall of secrecy. He offered no details about the initial symptoms, no anecdotes about the doctors he had consulted, no expressions of despair beyond the initial broad strokes. It was as if the 2 years were a black hole, a period of time swallowed by an unmentionable horror that Elias was determined to keep concealed. Arthur felt a growing conviction that there was something more, something far darker and more complex, beneath the surface of Elias Thorne's controlled sorrow. As the days turned into a slow succession, Arthur's work on the portrait progressed, but his unease intensified. The silence of Blackwood Manor, once a peaceful backdrop for his artistic endeavors, now felt like a stifling shroud. He found himself constantly listening, his ears attuned to the slightest sound from below. A whisper, a muffled groan, anything that might offer a clue to the true nature of the confined woman. He would sometimes catch Martha, the housekeeper, casting nervous glances toward the floor, her face a mask of worry, further solidifying Arthur's suspicion that she too was privy to a terrifying secret. The weight of those 2 years, unspoken and unexplained, settled upon Arthur's shoulders. He began to feel like a participant in a grim charade, a silent observer of a tragedy that defied conventional understanding. The initial professional curiosity had morphed into a desperate need to uncover the truth, a compulsion that transcended his artistic duties. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the answers lay somewhere in the silent, oppressive depths of Blackwood Manor, and that the 2-year span of the daughter's confinement held the key to a darkness he was slowly, inexorably being drawn into. The oppressive atmosphere of Blackwood Manor tightened its grip on Arthur with each passing day. The secrets Elias Thorne guarded so fiercely seemed to manifest in the very air, a heavy, unspoken burden. Arthur continued his painstaking work on the family portrait, but his focus was fractured, his mind constantly turning to the confined daughter and the chilling mystery of her 2-year isolation. The silence of the manor, once merely grand, now felt pregnant with unspoken horrors. He found himself listening, not just for the predictable creaks of an old house, but for something more, something that defied logical explanation. It was during the quiet hours of the late afternoon, as the slanting sun cast long shadows across the polished floors, that the first distinct sounds pierced the pervasive silence. A faint, muffled cry, thin and wavering, seemed to emanate from somewhere beneath his feet. Arthur froze, his brush hovering over the canvas, his heart lurching in his chest. He strained his ears, his breath held captive in his lungs. Had he imagined it? The sound was so fleeting, so ethereal, that it could easily be dismissed as the groan of an old beam or the rustle of leaves against the windows. But a cold dread settled in his stomach, a visceral reaction that told him otherwise. He tried to dismiss it, to attribute it to the fatigue of his long days, the unsettling stories, or the power of suggestion. He told himself it was merely the wind whistling through a drafty corridor, or the settling of ancient timbers. Yet the cries persisted, sporadic and hushed, but undeniably human. Sometimes they sounded like a whimper, sometimes a choked gasp, occasionally escalating into a muffled shriek that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the silence, before abruptly ceasing. Each sound, however faint, sent a fresh wave of unease through him, confirming his deepest fears about the tragedy unfolding beneath his feet. The sounds grew more frequent, more insistent, especially in the dead of night when the manor seemed to hold its breath. Arthur would lie awake in his bed, listening, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He imagined the unseen woman below, her torment echoing through the foundations of the house. He pictured her in the darkness, a prisoner of her own affliction, and the weight of her suffering pressed down on him, suffocating him with a profound sense of helplessness. The once grand and imposing manor now felt like a tomb, and he, an unwilling spectator to a private hell. Then came the night Elias Thorne announced his need to leave the manor. It was a brief, almost perfunctory announcement at dinner. "I must attend to some urgent matters in the village," Elias stated, his voice devoid of explanation, his eyes avoiding Arthur's gaze. "I shall return by dawn." The unspoken implication was clear. Arthur would be alone, save for Martha, the aging housekeeper. A jolt of apprehension, mixed with a strange sense of opportunity, shot through Arthur. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance to investigate. After Elias's carriage rumbled away into the inky blackness of the night, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake, the sounds from the basement intensified. No longer muffled, they became clearer, more distinct. A frantic scratching, a desperate thudding against what sounded like a wooden barrier, followed by agonizing moans that seemed to tear at the very soul. The cries were no longer fleeting whispers. They were raw, guttural expressions of agony and despair, unmistakably human. Arthur's blood ran cold. The thought of ignoring them, of simply retreating to his room and pretending not to hear, became an unbearable burden on his conscience. He paced his room, his mind racing. The sounds from below clawed at his composure, tearing at his resolve to remain a passive observer. He imagined the horrific scene below, the suffering woman, the mystery of her confinement. He felt a moral imperative to act, to at least attempt to understand, even if he couldn't offer immediate salvation. The air around him seemed to grow colder, charged with a palpable sense of dread and an overwhelming need to know. The truth, Arthur realized with a chilling certainty, lay not in the faded canvas he was restoring, but in the unseen depths of Blackwood Manor, beneath the floorboards, behind locked doors. And now, with Elias Thorne gone, the opportunity to uncover that truth, however terrifying, had presented itself. The cries from the basement were no longer just sounds. They were a desperate plea, a summons that Arthur, for all his apprehension, knew he could no longer ignore. He would descend into the darkness, driven by a desperate curiosity and a burgeoning sense of responsibility. The distant clip-clop of Elias Thorne's departing carriage wheels slowly faded into the pervasive silence of Blackwood Manor, leaving Arthur alone in the oppressive stillness. The house, stripped of its master's presence, felt even larger, more desolate, and infinitely more menacing. The muffled cries from the basement, which had been a constant, unsettling undercurrent since Elias's departure, now seemed to intensify, becoming more distinct, more urgent. They were no longer vague whispers, but clear, anguished sounds of human distress, punctuated by a frantic, rhythmic thudding. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. He waited, pacing his room, his mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. Fear, yes, a cold, creeping dread that clung to him like a shroud, but also a potent surge of curiosity, a desperate need to uncover the truth behind Elias Thorne's disturbing secret. He knew he could not simply ignore the sounds, not now that they were so undeniably human. The image of a confined woman, suffering in the darkness, fueled a growing sense of urgency, a moral imperative that outweighed his natural apprehension. He glanced at the tall grandfather clock in the hall. Its methodical ticking seemed to mock his indecision. Finally, long after the last faint light of the gas lamps had been extinguished throughout the house, and the manor was plunged into a suffocating darkness, Arthur knew his moment had come. He waited until he heard the telltale creak of the floorboards above, signifying Martha, the housekeeper, had retired to her own chambers. The house then settled into a deeper, more profound silence, broken only by the incessant, tormenting sounds from below. Taking a deep breath, Arthur lit a small, flickering oil lamp, its meager light barely pushing back the encroaching shadows. He clutched it like a lifeline, its feeble glow a beacon against the unknown. He descended the grand staircase, each step echoing loudly in the stillness, sending shivers down his spine. The air grew progressively colder, heavier, carrying with it a faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something subtly metallic. He reached the ground floor, navigating the labyrinthine corridors by the dim light of his lamp. His footsteps were cautious, hesitant, as he made his way towards the back of the house, where he suspected the entrance to the basement lay. He imagined Elias Thorne's disapproving gaze, his warnings about forbidden areas, but the desperate cries spurred him onward. He found it eventually, a heavy, bolted wooden door, almost hidden amidst a cluster of dusty ancestral portraits. The wood was old, weathered, and a distinct draft of cold, fetid air seeped from beneath it, carrying with it the undeniable stench of decay and something else, something cloying and sickeningly sweet. His hand trembled as he reached for the rusted iron bolt, its surface cold and clammy beneath his touch. The sound of the bolt scraping back was deafening in the silence, a prelude to the horrors that awaited him. The door groaned open with a mournful sound, revealing a steep, narrow staircase that plunged into an abyss of inky blackness. The cold intensified, a chilling embrace that wrapped around him, and the metallic scent grew stronger, almost overpowering. The cries from below, no longer muffled, were now clear, raw, and desperate. A woman's anguished wails, mingled with the clinking of chains. A wave of nausea washed over Arthur, but he steeled himself, compelled by an undeniable force to proceed. Slowly, carefully, he descended into the darkness, his lamp casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the smell of mildew and despair. The cries grew louder, closer, the clinking of chains, now a constant, chilling accompaniment. His heart pounded with a terrifying rhythm, each beat echoing in the oppressive silence. And then, at the bottom of the stairs in the faint, flickering glow of his lamp, he saw her. She was there, huddled in the deepest corner of the damp stone-walled chamber. Her clothes were ragged, her hair matted and wild, obscuring much of her face. But it was the chains that truly chilled him to the bone. Heavy iron shackles bound her wrists and ankles, secured to thick rings embedded in the cold stone floor. The raw, red marks on her skin spoke of constant chafing, of a desperate, relentless struggle. She was a prisoner, truly, tragically, a figure of profound sorrow and desperate confinement. The sight confirmed his worst fears, a visceral horror that dwarfed any of the unsettling whispers he had heard above. The sight of her, bound by heavy chains in the cold, damp depths of the basement, struck Arthur with a profound sense of shock and outrage. The meager light from his oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the crude stone walls, revealing the grim reality of her confinement. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the gloom, fixed on him with a desperate intensity that pierced his very soul. They held a raw anguish, a profound yearning, that was far removed from the violent madness Elias Thorne had so carefully described. He felt a surge of unadulterated fury at the deception, a chilling realization that everything Elias had told him was a carefully constructed lie. He approached her cautiously, his steps echoing in the oppressive silence, the clinking of her chains a chilling accompaniment to his approach. The air in the chamber was thick with the stench of damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something subtly metallic and sweet, like old blood. As he drew closer, he could see the intricate details of her suffering, the raw, chafed skin around her wrists and ankles, where the iron shackles had bitten deep, the thinness of her frame, the wild, unkempt cascade of her dark hair that partially obscured her face. She was a ghost of a woman, a shadow confined to the darkness, her vibrant life slowly being extinguished. Who are you?" Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, the words catching in his throat. He half expected a guttural snarl, a violent outburst, but instead a trembling voice, surprisingly clear despite its fragility, broke the silence. "My name is Eleonora," she replied, her voice imbued with a heartbreaking tremor, yet a surprising strength. "And I am a prisoner in my own home." Her gaze, direct and unwavering, held a plea that transcended words, a silent scream for liberation. Arthur knelt before her, the flickering lamp casting a warm, sympathetic glow on her drawn features. He saw no signs of the wild, uncontrollable violence Elias had described. Instead, he saw fear, desperation, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. "Your father, he told me you were ill," Arthur began, his voice laced with a confusion that bordered on disbelief. "That you were violent, that you needed to be confined for your own safety and for the safety of others." He recounted Elias's carefully constructed narrative, the unknown disease, the 2 years of isolation, the supposed danger she posed. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Eleonora's lips, a sound filled with profound cynicism and pain. "Ill?" she scoffed, her voice rising slightly, a raw edge of indignation entering her tone. "Yes, I am ill with loneliness, with despair, with the suffocating weight of this prison." She gestured with a chained hand towards the oppressive walls that surrounded her. "My father is a madman, Mr. Pendleton. He keeps me here, hidden from the world, so that I may never leave this house, never know a life beyond his suffocating control, never know the company of men." Her eyes blazed with a fierce, righteous anger, a passionate plea for understanding. Her words struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. The elaborate deception, the cruel lies, the carefully constructed facade of paternal concern, it all crumbled before the raw, undeniable truth of Eleonora's desperation. He felt a surge of incandescent rage ignite within him, a righteous fury against Elias Thorne's monstrous deceit. This was not a father burdened by a sick child. This was a captor, a tormentor, a man consumed by a terrifying possessiveness that twisted love into something abhorrent. Eleonora continued, her voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow against Arthur's preconceived notions. "He speaks of illness, of violence, but it is he who is truly sick, Mr. Pendleton. Sick with a twisted love, a possessive madness that seeks to extinguish my very existence." She tugged at her chains, the metallic clatter echoing ominously in the small chamber, a testament to her unending struggle. "He fears the world, fears my independence, fears my very womanhood. And so, he buried me alive in this tomb, under the guise of paternal care." Arthur's blood ran cold. The thought of such a prolonged, calculated cruelty sent shivers down his spine. He looked at Eleonora, truly looked at her, and saw not a dangerous invalid, but a vibrant young woman trapped and desperate, her spirit slowly being crushed by an unimaginable tyranny. The faint metallic scent in the air, which had always been a subtle undercurrent, now seemed to intensify, taking on a new, more sinister meaning. He felt a profound shift within him, a moral awakening that propelled him beyond mere observation and into a desperate need for action. "I believe you," Arthur whispered, his voice firm, resolute. The lie had been shattered, replaced by a terrible, undeniable truth. The weight of his own complicity, however unwitting, settled heavily upon him, fueling his burgeoning resolve. He knew with a sudden, overwhelming certainty that he could not leave her in this living tomb. He had stumbled upon a horrifying injustice, and his conscience demanded that he intervene. The raw anguish in Eleonora's eyes, coupled with the chilling reality of her confinement, solidified Arthur's conviction. The meticulously crafted facade of Elias Thorne's paternal care had crumbled, revealing a monstrous deception. His mind raced, grappling with the profound injustice he had uncovered. He looked at the heavy chains binding her, symbols of a cruelty that defied comprehension, and a fierce resolve hardened within him. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that he could not leave her in this living tomb. "I believe you," Arthur reiterated, his voice firm, unwavering. He knelt closer, the flickering light of his lamp casting long, dancing shadows on the cold stone walls. Eleonora's gaze, wide and hopeful, fixed on him, a silent plea for salvation. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am an art restorer here, and I have no intention of leaving you in this dreadful place." His words were not just a promise, they were a vow, born of a powerful sense of moral outrage and an unexpected surge of protective instinct. Eleonora's eyes, which had held so much despair, now flickered with a desperate hope. A faint, fragile smile touched her lips, a momentary respite from the years of suffering. You would truly help me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if daring to believe in a miracle. The sheer vulnerability in her question tore at Arthur's heart. He felt a responsibility to this broken woman, a silent compact forged in the chilling depths of the basement. "Yes," Arthur affirmed, his voice resolute. "I will help you. We will find a way out of here." He gestured to the chains, his brow furrowed in concentration. We must find a way to break them." He examined the rusted iron links, his mind already racing through possibilities, recalling any tools or methods he might have brought with him or might find within the house. The urgent need to liberate her eclipsed all other considerations. Eleonora's gaze was unwavering, her voice gaining a surprising strength. "My father keeps the keys, of course," she said, her tone laced with bitterness. "Always close to him. He trusts no one, especially not with my freedom." She explained that her father was a meticulous man, prone to keeping all important keys on a large ornate ring that he rarely let out of his sight. The thought of confronting Elias Thorne, of stealing from him, sent a fresh wave of apprehension through Arthur, but it was quickly overshadowed by his determination. "We will find them," Arthur promised, his mind already formulating a plan. He envisioned the layout of the manor, the possible locations of Elias's personal effects. The risk was immense, the consequences potentially dire, but the image of Eleonora's chained form fueled his courage. He knew he could not falter, not now that he had witnessed the extent of her suffering. The metallic scent in the air, which had been a subtle undercurrent since he first arrived, now seemed to permeate the very fabric of the basement, a chilling reminder of the grim reality. Eleonora's eyes gleamed with a desperate intelligence. "I have spent 2 years planning," she confessed, her voice a hushed whisper, a clandestine plotting in the darkness. "I know the house, its routines, its weaknesses. We can escape through the old servant's passage, which leads directly to the woods behind the manor. It's rarely used, overgrown, but it's our best chance." She spoke with a remarkable clarity, a sharp, tactical mind forged in the crucible of her confinement. This was not a madwoman. This was a survivor, a strategist. Arthur listened intently, absorbing every detail. The escape route, the knowledge of the house, it all presented a viable, albeit dangerous, path to freedom. A plan began to coalesce in his mind, a desperate gamble for liberation. The sheer audacity of it, escaping from Elias Thorne's carefully constructed prison, was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He looked at Eleonora, truly seeing her for the first time not as a victim, but as an ally, a partner in this dangerous endeavor. Her resilience, her quiet determination, filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. "Then we shall do it," Arthur declared, his voice firm, imbued with a newfound resolve. "Tonight, when your father is away. We will find those keys and we will leave this place." The pact was made, a silent agreement sealed in the chilling depths of Blackwood Manor, a promise of freedom whispered in the flickering lamplight. The weight of her chains and the secret of her imprisonment had now become his burden, and he would carry it until she was free. The plan, meticulously laid out in the dim, chilling confines of the basement, hinged on precision and secrecy. Arthur, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and righteous indignation, moved with a newfound purpose. He had explained to Eleonora his observations of Elias Thorne's habits, the likely location of the keys, and the timing of their audacious escape. Eleonora, in turn, provided invaluable insights into the manor's layout, the creaking floorboards to avoid, and the most discreet path to the hidden servants' passage. The air in the cellar, thick with the scent of damp earth and her palpable desperation, crackled with an almost tangible tension. As dawn approached, a pale, anemic light filtered through the grimy, high-set windows of the basement. Eleonora's face, etched with fear, but also with a nascent hope, was visible in the faint glow. Arthur, having meticulously searched Elias's study and bedchambers, finally located the ornate keyring, nestled discreetly beneath a pile of ledgers on Elias's desk. His heart had pounded with a terrifying rhythm as he retrieved it, the cold metal heavy in his palm, a tangible symbol of Eleonora's freedom, now within his grasp. The risk had been immense, but the thought of leaving her chained had been unbearable. Returning to the basement, Arthur felt a surge of triumph as he inserted the correct key into the rusted padlock on Eleonora's chains. The click resonated loudly in the silence, a sound of liberation. As the shackles fell away from her wrists and ankles, Eleonora rubbed her raw, chafed skin, a gasp of relief escaping her lips. Her movements were stiff, unaccustomed to freedom after 2 years of brutal confinement, but her eyes, now free from the shadows of despair, burned with a fierce, unwavering determination. The metallic tang, which had always accompanied her presence, seemed to subtly strengthen. They moved with practiced stealth, each step carefully placed to avoid alerting Martha, the housekeeper, who might still be asleep in her room. Eleonora, despite her weakened state, guided Arthur through the maze-like corridors of the old manor. She knew every creaking floorboard, every shadowed alcove, every shortcut. They bypassed the main staircase, opting instead for a less used, narrower set of stairs that led towards the rear of the house. The silence of the manor pressed in on them, punctuated only by their hurried breaths and the faint rustle of Eleonora's tattered clothing. The hidden servants' passage, as Eleonora had described, was a narrow, overgrown tunnel, barely discernible from the surrounding dense foliage. It led directly from a forgotten service entrance at the back of the manor into the heart of the ancient, sprawling forest that bordered the estate. The air outside was cold and damp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and wet moss. The sky was still a deep, inky black, but the first hints of dawn, a faint pearlescent glow, were just beginning to paint the eastern horizon. They were free, at least from the confines of Blackwood Manor, but now they faced the daunting wilderness. As they plunged into the thicket of trees, the dense canopy swallowed the last vestiges of moonlight, plunging them into an almost absolute darkness. The sounds of the forest enveloped them, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the hoot of a distant owl, the snapping of twigs under their cautious steps. Eleonora, despite her long confinement, seemed to navigate the uneven terrain with an uncanny ease, her steps light and swift, almost ethereal. Arthur, however, found himself stumbling, his city-bred senses unaccustomed to the treacherous footing and the disorienting darkness. They pressed onward, deeper into the impenetrable embrace of the woods. The thought of Elias Thorne's return, of his furious discovery of Eleonora's escape, spurred them forward. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Blackwood Manor before dawn fully broke and the search for them began. The forest, with its ancient trees and thick undergrowth, offered both concealment and a daunting challenge. It was a wilderness that promised both refuge and peril, a place where their next steps would determine their fate. As the first tendrils of true daylight began to pierce the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in dappled patterns of gray and silver, they finally emerged into a small, secluded clearing. Exhausted, disoriented, and utterly breathless, They collapsed onto the damp earth, their bodies aching, their minds reeling from the terrifying ordeal. They were far from the suffocating confines of Blackwood Manor, but they were also lost in the heart of an unfamiliar wilderness. The next crucial decisions, the path they would take, the future they would carve out for themselves would be made here, in the cold, uncertain embrace of the ancient forest. The first rays of true dawn pierced the dense canopy of the ancient forest, painting the clearing in dappled hues of green and gold. The air, crisp and cold, carried the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Exhaustion, a profound weariness that settled deep into his bones, washed over Arthur as he slumped against the rough bark of a towering oak. His heart still pounded from the frantic flight, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Beside him, Eleonora sat, her eyes closed, her face pale but serene, a picture of profound relief. The clinking of her now free chains, no longer a sound of torment, echoed faintly in his memory. After a few moments of quiet recuperation, Eleonora slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze, luminous and surprisingly intense, fixed on Arthur. A genuine smile, radiant and ethereal, bloomed on her lips, transforming her delicate features. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice soft, imbued with a profound gratitude that seemed to shimmer in the still morning air. "I cannot express the depth of my thanks. You have given me back my life, my freedom. I thought I would perish in that wretched cellar." She reached out, her hand, surprisingly cold, lightly touching his arm. Her touch, despite its coolness, sent a strange current through him, a subtle tremor he couldn't quite decipher. Arthur felt a flush of warmth spread through him, a sense of quiet satisfaction at having liberated her from Elias Thorne's monstrous cruelty. "It was the only right thing to do, Eleonora," he replied, his voice still a little breathless. "No one deserves such a fate." He looked around the clearing, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, and for a moment, the world felt peaceful, free from the oppressive shadows of Blackwood Manor. He began to envision their next steps, a journey to a distant town, a new life for Eleonora, far from her twisted father. But as he looked back at Eleonora, something subtle, yet profoundly unsettling began to shift. The radiant gratitude in her eyes seemed to deepen, to intensify, taking on an unnerving glint. Her smile, once so genuinely appreciative, now seemed to stretch a fraction too wide, revealing teeth that, in the growing light, appeared sharper, longer, almost imperceptibly so. A faint, almost imperceptible flush of color, a delicate rose began to appear on her previously pale cheeks, a stark contrast to her earlier pallor. The metallic scent in the air, which had lingered since he found her in the basement, suddenly grew stronger, richer, almost cloying. Her grip on his arm tightened, the coolness of her skin becoming almost chilling. The intense focus in her eyes, initially mistaken for gratitude, now held a predatory intensity that sent a jolt of alarm through Arthur. A ripple of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way down his spine. The silence of the forest, once comforting, now felt heavy, expectant, amplifying the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The gentle rustling of leaves seemed to whisper a warning. Eleonora's voice, which had been soft and filled with gratitude, deepened, gaining a new, guttural timbre, a seductive huskiness that was utterly alien. "Oh, Arthur," she purred, her eyes fixed on his throat with an unnerving hunger that sent a fresh wave of primal fear through him. The gratitude had vanished, replaced by an ancient, predatory glint. The delicate rose flush on her cheeks deepened, transforming into a vibrant, almost feverish crimson. Her pupils, he noticed with a chilling realization, seemed to dilate, engulfing the irises, giving her an unsettling, depthless gaze. Then, with a terrifying swiftness that defied human perception, her true nature was revealed. Her face contorted, not with pain, but with an ancient, terrifying hunger. Her lips drew back, revealing not just sharper teeth, but elongated, needle-like fangs that glistened wetly in the dawning light. The metallic scent, now overpowering, was unmistakably the scent of blood. Her eyes, no longer just intense, blazed with a cold, inhuman light, a hunger so profound it chilled him to the bone. The elegant features he had admired moments before warped into something monstrous, something beyond the realm of human comprehension. "I am grateful, Arthur," she hissed, her voice now a low, chilling whisper that seemed to slither through the air. "More grateful than you could ever know. For you, my dear deliverer, have brought me a most exquisite gift." Her grip on his arm became iron strong, her touch like ice, and her entire demeanor shifted from a vulnerable woman to a creature of terrifying power. The initial relief and triumph Arthur felt transformed into an absolute soul-freezing terror. The impossible truth slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He had not freed a woman, he had unleashed a monster. The horrific transformation of Eleonora, from a delicate, vulnerable woman to a creature of unspeakable terror, paralyzed Arthur with a profound, primal fear. Her elongated fangs, glistening wetly in the dappled sunlight, and her eyes blazing with an ancient, predatory hunger, confirmed the impossible truth. He had not freed a wronged maiden, he had unleashed a beast, a nightmare given flesh. The metallic scent, now overwhelmingly potent, filled his nostrils, the cloying aroma of fresh blood, a chilling premonition of his impending doom. He tried to recoil, to pull away from her chilling grip, but her strength was immense, far beyond anything human. Her fingers, long and slender moments before, now felt like iron bands clamped around his arm, rendering him utterly helpless. The coldness of her touch seeped into his skin, an unnatural chill that seemed to penetrate to his very bones, sapping his will to resist. The radiant beauty she had momentarily displayed transformed into a grotesque mask of ravenous desire, her features contorted by a hunger so profound it was almost tangible. Eleonora, or whatever monstrous entity now inhabited her form, brought her face disturbingly close to his, her breath cold and sweet, ghosting over his skin. Her eyes, pools of fathomless darkness, held his gaze captive, stripping him of all volition. He felt a chilling sense of inevitability, a terrifying resignation to his fate. The forest, which had offered the promise of freedom moments before, now seemed to press in on them, its ancient trees silent witnesses to his impending horror. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, all faded into an indistinct hum, overshadowed by the roar of blood in his ears. With a swift, brutal movement, Eleonora lunged. Her fangs, sharper than any razor, plunged into the soft flesh of his neck, a searing pain erupting through him. A choked gasp escaped his lips, a futile cry against the agonizing assault. He felt a searing, tearing sensation as her fangs pierced his skin, followed by a sudden, intense suction. His vision blurred, the vibrant greens of the forest canopy swirling into a dizzying vortex of crimson. The world tilted precariously, and a profound weakness, like a draining tide, swept through his limbs. The pain, sharp and intense at first, slowly began to recede, replaced by a strange, euphoric numbness. It was a terrifying paradox, his life force being siphoned away, yet his senses were simultaneously heightened, every sound, every sensation, amplified to an unbearable degree. He could feel the rhythmic pulse of his own blood flowing into her, a horrifying communion, a grotesque dance of life and death. The chilling cold of her lips against his skin, the subtle vibration of her throat as she swallowed, became agonizingly vivid details etched into his dying consciousness. He struggled, weakly at first, his hands flailing against her unyielding grip, but his strength rapidly ebbed away. His muscles spasmed, his vision flickered, and the images of Blackwood Manor, of Elias Thorne, of the portrait he had left unfinished, flashed through his mind in a chaotic, dreamlike sequence. He was a fool, a naive fool, to have believed in such a superficial tale of woe. The true horror had been lurking beneath the surface all along, cloaked in desperation and a father's supposed grief. As the last vestiges of his strength drained from him, a final agonizing thought pierced through the fog of his fading consciousness. The metallic scent. It wasn't rust or decay or the dankness of a basement. It was the scent of blood, a faint, almost imperceptible aroma that had clung to Eleonora from the very beginning, a subtle warning he had tragically ignored. He had dismissed it as the scent of the old house, of neglect, but it had been the indelible mark of a predator, the scent of the hunt, a constant, chilling reminder of her true, monstrous nature. The world went black. The last sensation he registered was the gentle release of her lips from his neck, the sudden cessation of the draining pressure. Then, nothing. His body, now a hollowed-out vessel, slumped lifelessly to the forest floor, a discarded husk in the vibrant tapestry of the woods. The silence returned, profound and absolute, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. The forest had claimed another victim, a naive savior undone by the very darkness he had sought to liberate. Eleonora the vampira stood over his prone form, her fangs still extended, a triumphant, terrifying smile gracing her blood-stained lips, her eyes blazing with an unholy satisfaction before she melted away into the shadows, leaving only the chilling silence in her wake. The old horse-drawn carriage groaned and rattled along the winding, overgrown lane, its wheels churning through the damp earth. Elias Thorne, his gaunt figure slumped in the worn leather seat, stared out at the encroaching twilight, his face a mask of profound exhaustion and a familiar, deep-seated sorrow. His brief, unscheduled trip to the village had been fraught with anxieties, his mind constantly returning to Blackwood Manor and the terrible secret he kept confined within its walls. A sense of foreboding, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, settled over him as the familiar Gothic silhouette of his home finally emerged from the gathering gloom. The carriage pulled up to the main entrance with a heavy sigh of the wheels, the horses snorting plumes of vapor into the crisp air. The grand oak door, usually kept tightly shut, stood ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. A jolt of alarm shot through Elias. He had meticulously secured the manor before his departure, his paranoia a constant companion to his guarded secret. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He disembarked with a hurried step, his heart pounding with a sickening rhythm against his ribs. The silence of the manor was not the usual oppressive stillness, but a hollow, expectant void, as if the very air held its breath. As he pushed the heavy door open further, the dim light from the entrance hall revealed a figure huddled on the cold stone floor, rocking back and forth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was Martha, the elderly housekeeper, her usually stoic demeanor shattered. Her white apron was crumpled, her gray hair disheveled, and her face, usually so composed, was contorted with a mixture of terror and grief. A wave of icy dread washed over Elias, confirming his worst fears. "Martha, what in God's name has happened?" Elias demanded, his voice a harsh whisper, filled with a frantic urgency. He rushed to her side, his gaze sweeping frantically around the deserted entrance hall, searching for any sign of disturbance, any indication of the horror that had clearly transpired. The pervasive metallic scent, which he had long grown accustomed to in certain parts of the house, now seemed to cling to the very air, stronger, more pungent than usual. Martha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a broken, strangled gasp. "Oh, Master Elias," she wailed, her hands clutching at his coat, her fingers trembling uncontrollably. It's Eleonora. She's gone. The visitor, he took her." Her words were punctuated by fresh sobs, each one a dagger to Elias's heart. A profound, soul-crushing despair washed over Elias. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ashen. His knees buckled, and he sagged against the doorframe, his world crumbling around him. Gone. Eleonora, his precious, dangerous daughter, unleashed upon the unsuspecting world. The years of meticulous care, the agonizing burden of her confinement, the countless sacrifices he had made to keep her existence a secret, all undone, shattered by the impulsive act of a foolish, unsuspecting man. He felt a profound sense of failure, a crushing weight of responsibility for the catastrophe that had just unfolded. He closed his eyes, a pained groan escaping his lips. The image of Arthur Pendleton, the unassuming art restorer, flashed in his mind. He had seemed so harmless, so utterly unaware of the true nature of the creature he had so foolishly liberated. Elias had offered hints, had given warnings, but the man's human sensibilities, his misguided compassion, had led him to commit the gravest of errors. He had opened the cage, and the monster had flown free. A deep, guttural lament escaped Elias's throat, a sound of profound grief and utter helplessness. It was a sound that spoke of shattered hopes, of a future irrevocably tainted by a terrible truth. No, no, not Eleonora, he whispered, the words choked with anguish. He knew the depths of her true nature, the monstrous hunger that lay coiled beneath her fragile beauty, a hunger he had spent years attempting to suppress, to control, to starve. He pushed himself away from the doorframe, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. His eyes, now filled with a chilling mixture of despair and a terrible certainty, turned towards the open doorway, towards the dark, silent forest beyond. "The fool," he muttered, his voice devoid of pity, filled only with the bleak resignation of a man who knew the inevitable. He believed her lies. He saw only a prisoner, not the true horror she possessed. His voice was laced with a chilling certainty. Elias Thorne stood in the desolate entrance hall of Blackwood Manor, the shattered pieces of his carefully constructed world scattered around him. Martha's sobs were the only sound, a mournful dirge for the tragedy that had unfolded. He knew, with a horrifying clarity, what awaited Arthur Pendleton. The man had traded a fleeting moment of compassion for an eternity of dread. "It is too late for him, Martha," Elias declared, his voice hollow, devoid of hope. "Far too late for the man who set her free." The silent forest beyond the open door seemed to echo his chilling pronouncement, a silent witness to the dawn of a new terror, unleashed upon an unsuspecting world.